When I say Monstera adansonii, you probably think of something like this. What if I tell you that this is actually the same plant? The only difference is that these two get to climb and mature while the other one is trailing and staying juvenile. Now, to get these plants to maturity, it doesn't just take a support, it also takes a whole lot of time. This plant has been with me for over 5 years now, and in those 5 years it has climbed up many moss poles. And if it wasn't for my chop and extend, a process where I take the plant, I chop it in half and then I replant it, this moss pole would be about 5 to 6 meters tall, which is obviously unrealistic for an indoor setting. And in today's video, we are exploring the chop and extend. We're then also seeing the results of the chop and extend, and I'm going to address the difference between growing outdoors, indoors, aroid mix, moss, and anything else that I know about this plant. So let's get started. Hey everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Monstera adansonii, subspecies lineata, is definitely one of my all-time favorite plants. And it's been one of these plants that has been with me for ages. It all started off with an unrooted vine that a friend gave me. I think by now it's actually 6 years ago, and I put it up on screen. Yep, this is what the plant originally looked like. And yeah, I mean, look, it took me 5-6 years to grow it really nice and large, but it actually looked really good already in year 2 and 3 and so on. Over the last 2 or 3 years, I haven't seen all too much increase in leaf size anymore. I think we are nearing the max out stage when it comes to leaf size. However, I do think that this latest one over here might be the biggest leaf this plant has ever grown for me. But before we're looking at the results in a little bit more detail, let's take it back to 3 months ago, so we're all on the same page how we got here. This is your reminder to please give the video a thumbs up, leave a nice comment down below, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. It's for free for you, but means the world. I would also really appreciate if you could put on that bell notification so you don't miss out on any of my videos. We cannot trust the algorithm, but I'm really relying on you guys watching my videos so I can keep this channel afloat. Thank you in advance, and now let's see what happened. Alrighty, let's have a look if this even fits in frame. Scrapey. It is time to chop. Last week I finished a video where I followed this plant's journey over the last year, and in that video I gave it a really heavy chop back, I gave it a chop and extend, and then I addressed the fact that it reached the extension yet again. So the last extension has only been 10 months. So the plant is growing fairly quick, and it's also sizing up quite nicely. It has matured nicely, even giving me inflows. And I just need to do another chop because this main shoot over here is reaching the ceiling, and the newest leaf, I can see the newest leaf coming out of the petiole, and it's just scraping along the ceiling. So that is definitely going to be damaged. And I don't want the newest, largest, most amazing growth to be damaged before it even gets a chance to unfurl. So we got to chop this plant. And I mean, that's the whole purpose, right? I know that at some stage these plants will outgrow their moss poles, and that's why I love using these grow vertical poles, because I know at some stage the plant will reach the top of its moss pole. So I need a pole that is flexible enough that I can chop it whenever I want, wherever I want, in whatever distance I want, and so on. So it's really just a plastic backing and a mesh at the front. I can cut the mesh to my liking and then just add the plastic backing to it. Hang on, let me show you a spare one, because I have already prepared the extension for later on. Grow Vertical is the company, by the way, and they're always linked in the description. So by default they come with 12 squares over here, so then obviously if you put the plastic backing on it, it would be a little more shallow but wider. With a wider surface area you have water evaporating faster, but you can fit more plants on one. I like to go with 10 in this instance. I think it's a nice balance. It reduces the surface area a little bit, gives a little bit... Bradley, hey, don't destroy my furniture. Sorry. Gives a little bit more depth to the pole, so it can hold more medium over here that is not exposed to the air, so it dries out less quickly, so less work ideally. I found 10 squares to be a good in between, right? I'm still giving the plant enough room to go left and right on this pole kind of without fully growing off, but I also create a little bit more volume. Anyway, I made that decision to go with 10 squares like 2 years ago, and I'm just running with that decision ever since because I'm just doing perfect extensions, let's say. Why are you going yellow? In anticipation of today, I have already cut the stems here and here. So they had plenty of time to dry out and callus over before I'm gonna pot them up today. That is just reducing the chances of rot. Actually, I think one thing I could do is I could take it out of its planter. The planter gives it stability and also catches excess water, but I don't need that right now. At least that way it's not scraping. Nope, it is still scraping. Okay, I thought maybe that way I can stop it from scraping and it gives me a little bit more room to maneuver. You know what, I just need to probably give up on that newest leaf looking nice. Anyway, so I cut over there. The reason why I cut there is that really what you see from here upwards is just 2 vines. And that's exactly where those 2 vines start. So I'm now separating those 2 vines that have done really well to the bulk of the plant that is down below, where I think I have 5 or 6 shoots. And I'll show you close up once I separate them so that I can actually bring you a bit closer. I'm happy to continue with just 2 plants going forward because those 2 plants are actually maturing quite nicely, and I think that way they're not stealing each other's thunder all too much. I've noticed, I've tried before, and I'm just going to start chopping. So now I'm actually just going to chop the actual pole exactly where I chopped the stems. So I'm just chopping the mesh first. So I've tried before having really lush poles, and it works. You can definitely create really lush poles with multiple plants. I've had up to 10 plants on my El Salvador, for example, and so on. But specifically with mature plants like this adansonii, I've noticed that it's usually 1 or 2 that really shoot the lights out, and the rest is kind of stuck behind anyway. So I think instead of aiming for a really lush pole, I'm just going to straight away just aim for those 2 main shoots to continuously mature. I think that is plenty. I cannot complain about the way that this plant looks. I'm more than just pleased with that. Okay, I'm just chopping through the mesh, and sometimes I can see these sort of roots like this one over here going from the top down the bottom, but in this instance actually I can't see any, and this one I can't free, unfortunately. I have to chop it off, which just means we're probably going to chop through the whole pole. No mercy, but that's okay. There's so many roots in the back, which I'll also show you in a sec once I can maneuver it a little bit better, that I'm not concerned about them losing a few roots. Now I'm just going to go literally chop straight through this pole, including all of the roots that are within, because YOLO. Okay, so I should have chopped through everything now. However, there is a garden stake in here that sticks out that was giving it stability. Last time around, I thought I could get away without the garden stake because the garden stake is making the next process really annoying, but the pole actually caved in within itself. It just flopped over. So not the whole thing, including the pot falling over, it's just within itself, it just kind of snapped because the top part, when watering, gets heavy first, so it just snapped over. So I had to put the garden stake in hindsight. So at least a good learning. This time around, I know I won't even attempt it without a garden stake, but that is going to be a pain because that garden stake is thoroughly stuck in there, and there's lots and lots of roots covering the garden stake as well. So I will probably destroy a few roots with the next process, but to be honest, I have no other choice. So the first step I'm going to do now is I'm going to just wiggle this around a little bit, and with the wiggling I'm just trying to make sure that it's all freed up. Beautiful. Yep. And now, as a next step, I'm just going to pull. And I'm going to pull the whole garden stake out of here. Gorgeous. There you go. Now I can show you things a little bit closer. And sorry, I'm obviously filming with lights on, so it's really glary, isn't it? Is that better maybe without this light on? No, but surely you can see all of these roots that are pushing up against the plastic over here, right? You can even see where I did the previous extension. This is the overlap where the two poles meet. But this time around I really chopped based on where the plant is, not necessarily where the extension is. Now, I don't want the garden stake to stick out at the bottom. I want the garden stake to stick out at the top so I can put another extension on it. So now we just need to bang this on the floor and push the garden stake up and hope we destroy as little roots as possible. Easy! Alrighty. And now you can also see how this growth at the top kind of got a bit damaged by the sealing, right? Let's just continue working with this part and then we're addressing the bottom part in a sec. Now, first things first, I'm going to try and remove some moss from here that has too much water retention, because that is going to go into the pot and it's going to be filled with aroid mix. And ouchie, the wires that I cut are pretty sharp. Okay. Now, realistically, there's so many roots in there. It's going to be hard to remove much moss, but I'm just going to try a little bit. This part is going to be in the pot. The pot has obviously much less surface area than the moss pole and is much bigger, hence more water retention, and the moss is the really water retentive component. So I would rather replace it with aroid mix that's less water retentive to avoid chances of rot in the pot. But realistically, I'm not really successful in getting a lot of moss out of here, and I've done this many times in my life and it's never actually been an issue. I'm just kind of being proactive. But can you also see all of the roots in here? And you can also see some that I had to chop. You know what, you could technically actually just grow it like this. You don't need a pot. The roots in the pole would be enough. But I suppose it would be hard to stand up. So I will definitely give it a pot. I think I'm going to stick to the 25 centimeters. So I'm going to pop this in here. Now, yes, there will be a few leaves at the bottom that are now being squished up, as you just saw that. One actually already snapped, made my life easy. I was just about to say, I'm not usually worried about these because they usually go yellow pretty quickly and then I just start pulling them out. It is what it is. So, really important to put this all the way to the bottom of the pot, because with a plant that size, stability is going to be an ongoing issue. So the garden stake in itself, where's my bucket? Oh no, it's outside. I'll just do it in here then. Okay, so I just top it up with aroid mix, my normal mix. The one that I've been recently doing has a little bit more tree fern fiber for water retention, but I don't want this for this plant. So this one has less tree fern fiber than my current mix has, or that I would give a plant that is kind of tiny and so on, right? So this is very chunky, very bark, pumice, perlite, cocoa chips heavy. Cocoa chips would be the only really water retentive part in here. Honestly, this pot, I mean, we can actually take the other one out of the pot and assess the roots so we know, because I followed the exact same principle with it last time. But I think this pot is mainly decoration and stability than actually encouraging that much root mass. Like, the plant is relying on the roots within the pole, not the pot. But of course, the more the merrier. If it can grow some roots into the pot as well, then I'd be more than happy. Okay, sorry, I was talking about stability. So make sure you put the pole all the way to the bottom of the pot. Let's take this as an example. You don't want your pole to be in the pot and then the pole being wonky within the pot. The pole in itself is already going to be wonky once it gets heavy. The pole and pot as a combination is already going to be wonky. You don't want to add a third element of now the wonky pole being wonky in the pot, which makes the whole thing even more wonky. How many times can you say wonky? So make sure it goes all the way to the bottom of the pot. I don't secure it, but you could technically cable tie it if you really want to. And then top it up with aroid mix, and now, if this thing would get top heavy, the whole thing would fall over, right? The pole and the pot. which is obviously not what you want, but that's why I put it into these decorative planters that are heavy, and I'm gonna push it up into a corner. So it's in the corner of my living room, and you can see that it's leaning backwards a little bit, so it's gonna lean back into the corner. So if it would fall backwards, and it has about 0.0 millimeters to fall backwards because there's a corner right there. That's why the plastic backing is really good as well, because then it protects my corner. You know what I mean? This is the extension I prepared. Now let's see how much of the extension I can actually use while still fitting my ceiling. Alright, I made it a little bit too big. Well, not really. Oh my god, get off there. Why did I do it this way? I could have just done it this way. I made it slightly too big, but that's okay. What I'll do is I'll use this as my overlap. I'm gonna see, I think this is good. Usually I do leave room at the top over there for my water bottle upside down, but in this instance I will not need that, and I haven't used it with the previous one as well. With this one I really want to max out room, so I'm gonna, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna overlap it by 5 cable ties to make it overlap perfectly. Now I hope this garden stake is gonna be long enough then. Maybe I'll pull it up a little bit. Okay, while I do this, let me keep talking about the stability part. So they're potting it all the way into the bottom of the pole. Make sure that the pole isn't wonky within the pot. Putting the pot into the corner and tilting it backwards makes sure that the whole thing can't fall over, and the garden stake ensures that the pole in itself doesn't fall over. So there's like 3 levels of stability. Maybe I should do a full video on this one. Now, next thing I need to cut out is the mesh. And this is exactly that sort of flexibility I enjoy having with these poles, right? Oh shit, I need to remove those cable ties as well. If you have a 3D printed pole that you purchased for a whole lot of money, I'm assuming you're not super keen on chopping it up and then restitching it back together. But because this is just made out of 2 materials, the plastic and the mesh at the front, I can easily replace both of them. I can also reuse the ones that, like, whenever I take a plastic off one of the old poles, I always reuse it. So it's still reusable, but at the same time, it is very modular and flexible. So I have a lot of freedom as to what I can do with my poles, and where I extend it, and when I extend it, and by how much I extend them, and so on. Okay, now hard to see, but I'm going through both of the poles, then through the front mesh, and then through the top mesh. Does that make sense? No. You know what I mean? I go through this plastic, and then also through the metal grid at the front. So they're all back together and secured. And I'll just do that on both sides. One moment, please. Oh no, I didn't. No! No! Hang on. I didn't think this through. When I put this in the pot now, is it like way too tall? I think I should have overlapped it by 1 more. Ouchie. Okay, made it a little bit shorter. Now we need to top it up with moss. The reason I haven't done this before is because this was already challenging enough as it is. Imagine I now also need to do it with a heavy pole because it's filled with moss. I'm not going to start filling it with moss, and I'm giving up on the cleanliness of my living room. Now with the moss, I want to make it dense enough so that the plant has plenty of room to expand its root system, but also not too dense so that there's no aeration. Also, this pole takes a lot of moss. If I make it too dense, I'm gonna go broke. If your pole is really, really heavy, especially when watered, you might have used a little bit too much moss. Alrighty, let me just do this while trying to not drop this pole. So I will concentrate for a minute, sorry. Oh my god, I'm sweaty as well. This is so exhausting. Alrighty, here we are. I'm gonna make a little gap at the top. Building my own funnel. I want the moss to kind of go diagonally down so that when I water, this is kind of like a little water reservoir. So I'll just take a water bottle, pour water in here. It's going to accumulate in here and then slowly soak through. Goal is to never let this pole dry out fully. Dry moss is hydrophobic. Once the moss is fully dry, it's going to be really hard to re-moisten it without it pearling off everywhere, because that's when, you know, it just pearls off. So if the moss is still moist by the time I water, it will absorb really, really neatly. For now, you're going to be parked in the back. Come on, take a back seat. Somebody else gets to shine now. I quickly need to clean up and I need to get another extension from downstairs, and then I'll see you back and we're going to address the bottom half. I'm back with another extension. So let's tackle the bottom part. I've also decided against taking out of the pot because why? It definitely has roots, it's happy. And again, you can probably not see much because of the glare. Maybe this is better. Plenty of roots. You can also see some of the roots that came from the top that went in here had to be cut, which means that some of these roots will rot. There's no more plant. But don't worry. After years of following this process, I've never actually had anything go wrong as a result of the rotten roots in here. I think it's a thing that definitely sounds more concerning in theory than it is in real life. Now, I also cut through, this is an old cut. This was not a recent cut. These are the two cuts I recently made. These are two old cuts. I've cut this plant so many times through the slice stage. So these two recent cuts should definitely reshoot. By the way, this used to be the top half, right? Before the last chop and extend. So it actually grew inflows from this spot before. Anyway, these two new cuts should definitely reshoot, and then I have another shoot here, I have another shoot here, a little one, I have another shoot here. And they were all just not really developing because they were shaded by the big mother plant. And obviously it's also not looking the best anymore because it's just a little bit older by now, right? But what I really want to do is I want to grow this plant outdoors. I want this to grow on my wall of aroids in my garden. Hang on, which way? This way. And hopefully it's a good candidate to grow out there year round. Because last year was the first year in this garden, and I tried some plants out there and not all of them actually survived. I'm putting a garden stake in there now. I just gonna have to just push it through. And if something in its way needs to get destroyed as a result of it, then so be it. So last year I tried a bunch of plants out there to see what survives. I mean, mainly also out of necessity. I just ran out of room indoors. And not all of them made it, right? So for example, I had my philodendron micans, my philodendron atabapoense. They hided it out there. My Monstera pinatipatita hided it out there. But my Epipremnum pinnatum, for example, did well. My dubia did okay. It didn't thrive, but it didn't completely die. So coming out of winter this year, my garden was looking a little emptier than it did initially. So now over spring and summer, I'm putting some duplicates out there so that even if these plants die again next winter, it's not a big issue. I have another one of them in there. But I'm also trying out new plants until I find the plants that actually have a good time growing out there. And I feel like this one might have a decent chance. It's not super cold in Sydney's winter, but yeah. Can definitely go down to, I think 2 degrees was the coldest last winter. But yeah, I suppose it's a learning curve and I want to continuously make learnings, and these are learnings that are valuable for me to share with you, for me to have. And obviously ultimately the goal is to establish a garden that is resistant towards my conditions out there and that can stay nice and lush year around, so I can enjoy it year round. And of course I could also Google. But honestly, you find a lot of rubbish on Google as well, so I don't think you can always trust that. But I'm going with my good old trial and error approach. Also, another thing, lots of people ask me why, like when I do this extension here, for example, people often ask me why I wouldn't put the new pole inside of the old pole. You can do that too, but you saw all of the roots. I would basically have to scrape all of the roots off of that plastic if I do that, and honestly it's not really a concern for me. The only concern here would be that water could be leaking down here. So be it. What's the word? I mean, if that's the worst that can happen. First of all, not a concern when growing outside. Even when growing inside, not a concern, because that water would just go into the pot. The pot needs watering anyway. But most importantly, it's not really a concern because it doesn't actually leak water. I've always been doing it this way because it's just much easier to put the extension on, and it doesn't hurt the roots, and I've never had any issues with it. So I think it's another one of these things that is more of a concern in theory than it actually is in practice, at least for me. And I see that happen a lot in the plant space, where some people, I think, really overcomplicate it a little bit. And it's like, come on, we're just dealing with plants. Like, what's the worst that can go wrong? Your plant could die, and then so be it. That's not the end of the world. Okay, now I can also take cuttings like this one, for example, that's kind of growing off a little bit, and I can start tying it to the pole. But you know what? Let me actually fill it first, because I think that would make more sense. Okay, the next step is gonna be super messy, but YOLO! I'm going to be filling this pole with aroid mix. Actually, it's not as bad as I expected, maybe. Okay, so this pole I want to fill with aroid mix instead of with moss, for a few reasons. I don't have that much moss, and moss is my preferred way of filling these poles, but I don't have that much, so I really want to use that moss for my indoor plants. Because moss actually has the best water retention, even though lots of people complain about how often they need to water their poles. You need to water even more often if you don't use moss. It has really good water retention, and secondly, it is very neat. As it absorbs the water, it really slowly absorbs water, and it absorbs a lot of it. And it can very neatly absorb the water without any excess going left, right and center if the moss isn't hydrophobic at the time of watering. Whereas this aroid mix would have way more little air pockets where the water can just run through and create a whole lot of mess. Air pockets also means it can dry out easier. Huh? However, this is going to go outdoors, and outdoors things will dry out more often, but I just walk around with a hose and water it, and this is perfect to be watered with a hose. I don't have to worry about the mess that the hose will make when I water this, but at the same time it's going to rehydrate really quickly. It's not going to go hydrophobic like sphagnum moss does. Press it a tiny little bit, but it will also compress over time as I water. Huh? Last one. This was actually not as messy as expected. That's good news. Okay. Clip this on here so it can have a little head start. Okay. Alrighty, here we are. It's looking pretty good. I'm really excited for this experiment. I'm really excited to grow this one in moss indoors and this one outdoors and see how they're performing over the next couple of weeks or months. And of course I want to take you along this journey. So I'll see you when there's some updates to share. Bye. And here we are. Now let me show you the results. let's start off with the bottom part first maybe. And just a reminder that I chopped this in January. We are now in April, so January is the middle of summer over here in Australia, so it was probably a really good time to chop that. Keep in mind the results could look very different if I would have chopped it half a year later at the worst part of the year. Let's start off with the roots, and I know that there's a lot of light on us right now, so I hope the glare is gonna do my head in, but surely we can see a whole lot of roots over here. Keep in mind this entire part of the pole that's filled with aroid mix is new, so any root that you can see over here all the way to here, they're all new, and that's really what I mean by the moss pole being a vertical extension of the pot. Can we see this? Anything from here upwards has grown in the last 3 months. So it has definitely grown really, really well. However, I almost think this plant is growing a little bit too fast without really sizing up significantly. The internodal spacing is actually quite large, like this large approximately, which is not unusual for more juvenile plants. But I was actually hoping for this plant to mature a little bit faster out there before it runs away, and then I need to do another chop and extend and so on. However, there is a more mature cutting out here, down here, this one, and you can see this one is definitely maturing really nicely. This is the newest leaf that it's growing outdoors. So this one wasn't at the top when I put the extension on, so it's slowly catching up, but over here, and I don't know, yeah, it's really heavy, I can't bring you all too close, but over here, the internodal spacing is only about this big, right? So with maturity, the internodal spacing is significantly decreasing, which obviously then optimizes the amount of leaves on any given pole and also reduces the need for chop and extend. So that's my preference, but yeah, I was actually a little bit surprised by that. I would have expected that the higher light exposure outdoors would facilitate maturity a little bit faster. We're in autumn now and we're going into winter, so I'm gonna do nothing for now. I'm just gonna put it back outside, but once they all reach the top, I don't think I'm gonna do another chop and extend in winter. I think I'll wait till the beginning of spring to potentially facilitate one of those. What I might then do is I'll just chop the plants somewhere and let the plant reshoot, and often when the plant reshoots it actually sends growth hormones into the latest 2 nodes, so I'm also then doubling the impact with the reshoot. Basically I'm gonna let the plant grow over winter, then cut off the winter growth, let it reshoot, double the impact, and then hopefully see double impact nice spring growth. But obviously that's a long-term vision, that's another 4 months away. But anyway, I think overall the plant has dealt really well with the outside conditions, but obviously the true test is seeing whether or not this plant is going to handle the winter conditions out there as well. But the good thing is I have nothing to lose with this plant because keep in mind, I don't often actually keep the bottom part of my moss poles because, well, I have too many plants already as it is. Have a look at these. So I don't necessarily need to duplicate. I don't need to keep all the duplicates in the world. Look at that. And keep in mind, if I would have kept all of the bottom parts of all of my, just adansonias even, I have like 7 adansonias by now or something like that, right? Probably more, because obviously could have extended the first one. You know what I mean. So really the reason I kept this one is to have that experiment outdoors. This one is the one that's growing indoors, and it has grown in that spot ever since I moved to this house. The only thing that changed with this plant is the light. About 1 year ago actually, so I moved in 18 months ago. So the first 6 months it was growing under a Soltec light. 1 year ago I changed to the new Mother Life Spectrum, which is a vertical, it's right here, hang on, I'll show you. Hello. As you can see, the light is vertical. And guess what? The plant is vertical. That is what's giving me this beautiful display side. The leaves are facing forward because that's where the light exposure comes from. Obviously, they face more forward over time. When they're fresh and young, they're a little bit more perky, and then eventually they really nicely fold down, kind of hiding the pole, which is the goal, right? You don't want to see the pole, you want to see leaves. Now, I do think that this leaf might be the largest leaf it has ever grown for me. I know that adansonii, there's different types of adansonii, and I believe that all adansonii can grow quite quite large. I actually think that the subspecies Laniata does not grow as large as some of the other mature adansonias I've seen, but I haven't really seen a subspecies Laniata growing super large. So I'm not too sure if this is maybe the maximum or if that's just a maximum indoors. Well, guess that's another experiment for the outside plant to show to us. But from the 6 years of growing this indoors, I do believe this would be the biggest it has ever been, or at least on par with the biggest it has ever been. Now the good thing is that while it's the biggest it's ever grown, we still have quite a lot of room on that pole left. So there are chances of getting more mature leaves. I think historically my issue with this plant was that as soon as it gets really nice and large, it throws out inflow after inflow after inflow, and that's what happened last season with it. It was growing really nice, and then it had I think 4 or 5 inflows just from the first stem. The second stem also had a few inflows and so on. There's a second one here, down here. And when the plant puts all of the effort into the inflows, I've noticed a significant decrease in leaf size thereafter. I had them this spring and I had them last spring as well. So I feel like it constantly wanting to flower has kind of set back the plant, but the fact that it also constantly flowers makes me think that this might just be the level of maturity that it can reach, right? So anyway, suppose it's an experiment. I'm really hoping that it will not throw out any flowers, and maybe going into autumn winter is going to help with that, but then also maybe going into autumn winter is not necessarily going to help with getting bigger leaves out of it. At the end of the day, we need to see how we go. The proof is in the pudding. Time will tell. Gotta stay patient and let the plant tell me the story. Yeah, overall, really happy with this. Now let me show you the roots over here as well. Here, all of these roots, you can actually distinctly see some roots growing up as well, which is normal. But yeah, I mean, the extension starts here. Right, and you can see where the overlap is. So all of these roots are brand new. So really happy with that. And keep in mind, only 1 out of the 2 shoots has actually made it onto the extension. So all of these roots belong to the big top shoot. And then obviously down here, I can't actually lift it, my ceiling is too low. But down here, this is just packed with roots by now. I have to say, I think the moss has shown better root growth. But that could also be a result of this being a more mature plant. A more mature plant is going to root more than a juvenile plant. Obviously, it's an imperfect experiment. I suppose I'm growing the same plant, but they're at different levels of maturity, they're growing in different mediums, and they're growing in different conditions. So I suppose it's hard to figure whether or not an observation I make is a result of the maturity, the growing medium, or the conditions, or is it a combination of all of it? I do, however, think that either one works just fine. If I would have put aroid mix in the pole of the mature plant and grow it inside and moss outside, I reckon I would have had the exact same results. I reckon if I would put this plant outside, it would have matured faster, but over winter it will also decline faster. So I think over the year, this plant is actually going to produce more consistent growth, whereas this one is going to go through ups and downs with the seasons and so on. At the end of the day, I think Monsteras are fairly resilient and fairly resistant, right? So we have flexibility when it comes to the care, as long as we're meeting some minimum conditional requirements. At this stage, these plants have been exposed to 20 degrees plus. It was not lower than 20 degrees. Actually, last week we went down to 17 outside. But outside it will go down to 3-4 degrees at nighttime over winter. So I think that's the real challenge. But we haven't experienced that yet. So far they've both been growing in 20 degrees. They've both been consistently moist. They both had plenty of light, either from a grow light or natural light over the best part of the growing season outdoors and so on. So I'm just meeting the basic conditional requirements for this plant, hence it's thriving. I'm putting in the work. I'm keeping the moss pole moist over here by just pouring water down into that little funnel that I created at the top and letting it absorb. Over here by just hosing it down outside. But I'm still putting in the effort. It's just a different way of caring for the plant, but the principle is the same. I'm not letting the pole dry out. I am staying on top of nutrient provision. Over here inside I provide nutrients with every watering. Over here, I provide nutrients, I try and provide nutrients every second week, but I water this more frequently because it's outside. It dries out quicker. If I would provide nutrients with every watering, I would provide nutrients every 2 days and then potentially over fertilize, right? So the care is a little bit different, but that's because they're growing in different conditions and I'm just adjusting it accordingly. But either way, I am seeing success. So hopefully this is a good representation of how our care approach can actually be quite varied yet yield good results. There is no right or wrong as long as we meet the basic requirements that are set by the plant's DNA. Now, what's my preference? When it comes to a low effort requirement, this is my preference. It is just out there, I hose it down on a dry day, or like, you know, if it hasn't been raining and it's been quite low humidity for a couple of days, I just hose it down. But it almost rains every day in Sydney, so most of the time rain does the watering but also the cleaning for me. So very, very low effort over here, right? More effort over here. I need to stay on top of the watering. Mother Nature is not helping me out. When I water, I just water the moss pole, but to make it clean, I never spray the leaves while it's inside. So I need to take it outside, hose it down, let it dry, put it back inside, and so on. So more effort involved with this plant, but in return, I get a more sheltered position for that plant. So the plant is less likely to suffer like mechanical damage from heavy winds, storms, cold damage, and so on, right? So it's a bit of a trade-off, and ultimately this is one of my absolute favorite plants of all time. So I really want to have both. I want to have a more low maintenance one outside that hopefully thrives and surprises me, but I also want to have my kind of backup over here, or my mother plant, my pride and joy, the one that I'm really happy to put the effort in. And this plant is literally located right there. My couch is right here. Every night I go on that couch and I watch the telly. I get so distracted from the television because this plant is right next to it and it's so incredibly beautiful. I think this plant actually gets the most viewing time from my perspective. It's definitely the plant I stare at the most. So I'm more than happy to put in the effort. Apart from that, I think the process over here is pretty stock standard for me as well. I have been doing this for many, many years by now. And all of my knowledge around moss poles and extending and watering and maturing your plant and so on has been put in content. That's what I do. It's hard to get me to shut up about this. I'm so passionate about this vertical growing, and it is so much fun to me, and I really want to share that fun with you, and I also want to share that information or my learnings with you. So there's a moss pole playlist that literally has everything in there that you could possibly ask for in relation to moss poles. So if you're curious to find out more about this approach and how all of this works, please check out my moss pole playlist. Please also give this video a thumbs up, leave a nice comment, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next video. Happy growing!